It really is a great pleasure to be here today. This is, I believe, indeed, the first ever symposium of its kind on futures analysis for development. And indeed, I wanted to thank the Woodrow Wilson Center for hosting this, as well as our State Department colleagues and our National Defense University colleagues for co-hosting it. I also wanted to thank the two Steves, to thank Alex Deegan for his leadership, Susan Reichley. But most of all, I wanted to thank the person who I believe is the true inspiration for this seminar, and that's Isaac Asimov. We were told that this conference began in terms of planning about 6 months ago. In reality, it began 65 years ago. Isaac Asimov was the great science fiction writer and scientist who posited the existence of a foundation in his Great Foundation series. And what he said was that if you look at the actions of people, you look at the actions of nature, and you study them well enough, you can predict what is going to happen in the future, and not just in the next 5 and 10 years. He was positing 30,000 years off into the future. He said that you could do this through what he called mathematical sociology. And he said if the universe is big enough of what you're looking at, the patterns and the predictability of this analysis would be even better. And what he did was to posit that his hero, Harry Seldon, created a foundation which brought together the great wisdom of the world, the great thinkers of the world, and not only did they predict the future, but they sought ways to influence it into more prosperous, democratic, and peaceful patterns. So we are the foundation here today. And indeed, I believe that when the president gave his speech a year ago at the United Nations, where he called for a global development strategy, he was asking us to put together a foundation. He was essentially saying that development now is too important to the United States to be left to actions that occur over 1 or 2 or 5 or even 10 years. He said 3 things made it important to the U.S. national interests, and I want to frame the discussion today by talking just briefly about these. He said that we, too, as Asimov said, prefer to live in a world that's peaceful, that's democratic, that's prosperous, that's respectful of human rights and respectful of human dignity. He also said that a world that is developing is in our economic interest, because much of our economic growth depends upon our linkages with the rest of the world, our trade and investment in developing countries. And he pointed out that developing countries are our fastest growing markets abroad. 85% of the new exports from the United States over the next 2 decades will come to countries that have received foreign aid or are now getting foreign aid. And so it's all about creating jobs as well. But he also said that it was in our national security interest. He pointed out that countries that are prosperous and developing don't traffic in drugs, in weapons, in people. They don't spew out large numbers of refugees across borders or across oceans. They don't transmit pandemic diseases. They don't harbor terrorists or now even pirates. And they certainly don't require American forces. So the president said development matters, but he also said we have to prepare for the future development patterns, and he spelled out a set of changes that he saw occurring in the international community, which we at USAID have taken very, very seriously and incorporated into our planning for the future. Among the aspects that he cited was a global economy that's growing now at multiple speeds. It's growing faster than it has ever grown in the past, but that growth is not uniform. We've seen incredible achievements in development over the past decades. Today, children growing up will live 17 years longer than their parents just 50 years ago. Maternal and infant mortality has plummeted, literacy rates are skyrocketing, but even as that occurs, we're seeing more uneven distribution of wealth within countries and between countries. And there's a continuing sense that Jesus indeed may have been right when he said, "The poor will always be with us." We're also seeing demographic shifts that are complicating once steady development patterns. I don't like the phrase the youth bulge because I think it presents this image of a scary bunch of kids who are out to overthrow governments around the world and join Joseph Kony and other murderers. But the reality is we are facing a demographic change. I prefer to call it a demographic dividend because we have a group of young people who are now capable of contributing to their societies. For every 300,000 child soldiers that there are in the world, there are 1.7 billion young people who are seeking how to improve their lives and the lives of their families. We're also seeing access to knowledge grow briskly in the developing world as it becomes more interconnected. And I think the symbol of the 21st century is going to be the mobile phone. It is changing the way we do business. It is bringing the world into every small village around the world. It is changing how we do development. We're also seeing shocks reverberate much more quickly and much more widely than ever before. We're going to talk all about global climate change here, and I'm delighted that even our biggest skeptic now acknowledges that it is indeed a phenomenon that is occurring around the world. But we have to think about what the implications of this are, and not just 2 years and 5 years and 10 years in the future, but even further. What we're seeing in the Horn of Africa may indeed be the future, where a changing rain pattern from a drought every 10 years to now what is basically a drought every year has brought together a perfect storm of famine, war, and drought to create the disaster we're seeing. And yet, on the positive side, USAID has had the capability to work with 8 million Ethiopians over the past decade to strengthen their resiliency so that they are not part of the numbers who are receiving development assistance right now. And so we can respond quickly. I would also remind you that we're in a world now where a vendor self-immolates in Tunisia, and within 7 months, 3 authoritarian governments fall in that region. That's a remarkable world we live in that sense. We're also seeing democratic governance expanding globally and yet haltingly. We've got 17 new democracies in Africa alone in the past 15 years. And yet we still see weak governance, we still see rampant corruption, and we still see crackdowns on civil society all around the world. Finally, we're seeing a new environment for aid itself. The old pattern where overseas development assistance filled gaps in fiscal budgets or savings rates abroad is pretty much gone forever. The United States is giving about $30 billion worth of assistance to developing countries, but total capital flows through the private sector to those same countries reach $1 trillion a year. And even the $30 billion that we give as an official government is less than what private American citizens give, which is $36 billion. And it's a third of what remittances are from America to the world, which is about $100 billion. And so what we need to do in this environment as an aid agency is not to fill fiscal gaps, but to look for opportunities for partnerships, to sponsor innovative approaches, to incorporate science and technology in everything that we do, and to be a catalyst for development. Indeed, I think everything that we're talking about here today feeds into this vision that the President brought to the United Nations. And I want to, in particular, highlight the importance of USAID as a thought leader and a learning institution, just as other institutions in this room are. We went through a period where we had eliminated our Office of Policy and Planning. And for many, many years, that was a priority that was not treasured at USAID. And over the last few years, this has been reversed. We are now seeking to become a thought leader, indeed, the thought leader in the development field, working with our interagency partners within the U.S. government, working with the many non-governmental organizations and private contractors and international organizations that have wisdom to bring to this space. We are working with universities and academic institutions to try to bring their knowledge together. Indeed, one of the things that we've learned over the course of the past few years is that no government agency has a monopoly on good ideas, on financial resources, on ground truth, or on moral authority. We need to work together. Within our Policy Planning and Learning Bureau, we are taking this very seriously. You have a document which sets out our next 4 years of planning, which I think is available in the foyer. But at the same time, we're doing individual studies on issues like the youth bulge or demographic dividend, on climate change, on development as it relates to countering violent extremism, on education for the 21st century, on issues related to women and development. And let me say that the single thing that I think we've learned most of all over the last 10 years is that unless women are front and center of all of our development efforts, unless they're integrated, mainstreamed, unless they are planners, implementers, and beneficiaries of all of our programs, they simply won't work. So the challenge that I'd like to do for you today is to move out of your comfort zone. We at AID like to think in terms of budget cycles, and we're on to fiscal year 13, even as we don't have a clue what's going to happen in fiscal year 12. We're starting to begin fiscal year 14. But I want you to start thinking about fiscal year 25 and fiscal year 30. I won't challenge you to think 30,000 years ahead like Isaac Asimov did. But I think we do have to consider what the lessons of today are teaching us about the future. And I think we need to incorporate that in the work that we're doing. Again, thank you so much for taking what is a very valuable day worth of work that you could be doing outside. I know your inboxes are all going to look awful on Monday. I also wanted to thank in particular our mission directors who are here today. They are the face of AID in the world. They are the thought leaders. The beauty of AID is that we are a decentralized organization, and even as we seek to do these things within our PPL Bureau and our Development Innovation Ventures and our Science and Technology Office, the real impetus, the real ground truth, the real knowledge, and where the rubber meets the road is in the field, with our mission directors, our Foreign Service nationals, and the rest of our staff. So again, thank you for coming today. I really look forward to hearing what you come up with, and if you want to rename this group the Foundation, I think that would be an appropriate approach. Thank you.